Hi, everybody who's joining in from the stream as well, and welcome to the second day of our Full Spectrum Curatorship Conference. We had a very interesting day yesterday, and there's much more to come today. With me is Arjan Dunnewind, who's IMPAKT's director. Hey, Arjan.
Hi, welcome everybody at home also.
And yeah, let's look at what we discussed yesterday. So we had a conversation with Ade Dharmawan from the Ruang Rupa Collective. And he very much discussed with us his ideas on how to collectively curate something within a model that is self-sufficient, where the core values of sustainability, generosity, humor, and transparency are at the core of this particular practice. And through this conversation, he challenged the idea that curating or art making should always result in an exhibition, and critique the exhibition as potentially an extractive model, and gave a couple of glimpses of other potential ways to then present and to incorporate publics and to reach publics through art and art making and art presenting. Then afterwards, we had a lecture from Angelique Spanings from MU Hybrid Art House in Eindhoven. And she presented to us her exhibition Worlding Worlds from MU and Real Feelings. And Worlding Worlds discusses this idea of world making as a very powerful tool to look at potential futures and potential ideas of how society looks like, and to definitely also include perspectives that might not fit into our dominant narratives. And with her project Real Feelings, she discussed how right now, and especially right now as we are confined in our homes due to the pandemic, we are even more intertwined with our technologies from an emotional point of view. And she looked at different ways of how technology then understands our human feelings and how it indexes this. With one artist who specifically looked at how the smile is the facial expression that can be best picked up by machines. And all the other ranges of emotions, of course, that people feel being more difficult to pick up on and to quantify and to understand from a machinic or algorithmic point of view. Then the final lecture of yesterday was by Dorina Wheels, who's a Mexican curator. And she really talked us through her curatorial practice and the questions that she asked herself when she makes a new program or an exhibition. And she gave a glimpse on her background and how that led to the curatorial practice that she has today. And in her practice, this idea of the digital is central, and the digital being a interconnection, a combination of the physical experience and the digital, and how they relate and coexist simultaneously as one intertwined new kind of understanding or experience. She discussed how she curates for local audiences in Mexico City and how that might differ from other places. With the example that in Mexico, most people, or 80% of people, join the internet via their phones and on public Wi-Fi, thus making curating a very different practice, and maybe not, might not work out to have very heavy computer-based exhibitions, for example. And she asked the questions how hybrid structures can then help us to connect to audiences in different kind of forms, in different kind of audiences with different forms of access, of technological knowledge. And then yesterday closed off with the panel Academia and Art, moderated by Arjan, where we discussed different ideas of how theory and practice correlate. We looked at the idea of the artistic PhD and how theory might inform an artist's practice, but might also maybe distract or become too much of a goal on its own. And I think we had a lot of different ideas there and contrasting ideas of where theory situates itself, but also in how far theory or academia is institutional, or maybe can also live outside of those kind of existing structures. For today, we'll have a lecture by Florian Wüst titled In Between Films. Then we'll continue with a lecture by Pauline Dresser called The Makeable Mind. Then Katarina Gregos will talk with us in her lecture called Let's Talk About Love. And the final lecture of today is from Wade Wallerstein with his lecture titled Virtual Phenomenology, Curating the Digital. A brief note is that at the end of the day, we'll have the different curators all together. So if you have questions that you would like to ask to all of them to see how their practices relate to a particular kind of idea, then that's your moment. So if you have any questions, keep a note throughout the day. And at the end, you can ask those. And at the end of the lectures, you're of course welcome to ask questions to the specific lecturer. Then I will now give the word to Arjan.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Marijn, for your recap of yesterday. And I'm very much looking forward to the 4 lectures that we have today. And as Marijn already mentioned, we're going to start with Florian Wüst and his presentation In Between Films. Florian Wüst was born in 1970 in Munich, and he's a Berlin-based film curator, artist, and publisher. He has curated film programs for international art institutions, cinemas, and festivals, like, for instance, Arsenal in Berlin, the Werkleids Biennial in Halle, and the IMPAKT Festival in Utrecht. From 2016 to 2020, Wüst was the film and video curator of the Transmediale. He's a co-founder of the Berlin Journals on the history and present state of the city, an ongoing series of publications that address the social, cultural, and economic changes in Berlin and other cities. Please welcome Florian Wüst.
Thanks a lot, Arjan, for your nice introduction, which helps me to cut the first part of the beginning where I was would talk about myself. But as you can see here in my background, this is a 20-year practice of film curating. You see a couple of VHS tapes. So I combine quite a lot the digital and still the analog artistic practice or the analog technology in my curatorial work. And one reason for my long relationship with IMPAKT, which I very much appreciate, is that the year 2000, I did my MA at the Piet Zwart Institute in Rotterdam. I lived for a couple of years in the Netherlands at that time. And there we also started to have a curatorial relationship with IMPAKT. And as you introduced, I was trained as an artist at the Braunschweig School of Art. But about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I more and more shifted from artistic practice to publishing, as you introduced. But the first or the main leg of my practice, the film curating, remained, and most of my projects are relating to that. Okay, I want to talk the title of my presentation today, which gonna present you my way of curating, but I'm gonna also give some insight in some institutional practices and collaborative projects, because I work a lot in collaborative and collective settings. It's entitled In Between Films. So the main question there is also for all my work in curating, how to relate films or works of art. What narrative emerges from among the films I do present and discuss with the audience. So I think that's really the essence of curating, is creating relationships between works of art, basically, but also works of other genre. So we are not confined to only presenting art. I'm gonna introduce that quickly. And so the signature, I would call it, of my curatorial practice is creating new, unexpected, surprising, revealing, speculative relationships, or also productive contradictions between films and or works of art. And I would consider that as a general essence of curating, and that's why curators are there for. And to exemplify this approach, I would like to start with this composing of works in the context of a film screening, of a film series, of an exhibition. I would like to show you 3 excerpts, and to also show with this that what connects the works or what creates a relationship is not necessarily only the narrative and the thematic logic of it, but also relates a lot to the aesthetic connections and sometimes images that come back, reappear, pop up in certain films within a short film program, for instance. I'm gonna now start to share my screen. All right, So here, just, you see my screen well?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So here, just a glimpse of my homepage, which needs lots of reworking or updating, but there's always the latest news, and then there's a linked list to my projects, fwüst.com. And so these are the three films I want to present in short excerpts. They're only 2 to 2.5 minutes long. I'm going to talk afterwards about them a bit, and I think it will become obvious what relates these films and why they exemplify my curating. I switch to VLC now. Okay. Here we go.
Ausatmen. Nochmal einatmen. Eine Bein über das andere legen. So. Halten Sie an. Drehen Sie an. Faust bitte. Gehen Sie in die Hocke. In die Hocke bitte. Stehen Sie mal auf bitte. Drehen Sie sich bitte um. Stehen Sie bitte auf den Zehen. Auf den Zehen. Auf den Zehen. Auf den Zehen.
Ja vas pozdravljam ispred Kreditne banke Zagreb. Mi se nadamo da će vam moći ostvariti dobru poslovnu suradnju i da će vam moći pomoći u rješavanju vaših financijskih problema.
Moraš ići vani, probijaš se, raditi. Poslije nekad ti dođe da kažeš više nikad se nada ne vratiti. Nema se zašto više da se nada vraćaš. Osjetiš se isto kada ti izbačeš svoje društva, idi vani pa probijaj se sam kako znaš. A onda, ako bude tako dalje, ićemo vani, ićemo dalje u Kanadu ili Australiju raditi. Moraš sebi da se probiješ. Treba za nas da se živi nekako. A ja ne znam kako je drugo u Ljubuškom baru, da sam ja tako izgleda da je. Treba, ako ćeš dobiti radno mjesto, treba dobro da platiš, da radiš. Mene je to pogodilo.
Pa sad i ja bi otišao, hvala Bogu i drugu Titu, kad je on ovako isposlovao, pa i ja se borim da i moja djeca imaju i frižider, i kauč, i svjetlo, i sve da imam, kao i on što ima. A sadina da mi je pogodno nije, jer svaki ima smisli ti za svoje dijete kako bi ga ti ostavio pa da kreniš.
Ja bi se sliknula od vas.
About 10 years ago, we had one of our most important insights, and that was that the PC was going to become the digital hub for your digital life. What did that mean? Well, it meant that that's where you were going to put your digital photos. Where else were you going to put them? Your digital video off your digital camcorder. So, we've got a great solution for this problem. And we think this solution is our next big insight, just like an iPhone, an iPad, or an iPod Touch. And we're going to move the digital hub, the center of your digital life, into the cloud. Because all these new devices have communications built into them. They can all talk to the cloud whenever they want. And so now some people think the cloud is just a hard disk in the sky, right? And you take a bunch of stuff and you put it in your Dropbox or your iDisk or whatever, and it transfers it up to the cloud and stores it, and then you drag whatever you want back out on your other devices. And so everything happens automatically, and there's nothing new to learn. It just all works. It just works.
I hope you heard and saw it well. One question, Marianne, is it possible that you make me see the images of the others? I'm talking into the void otherwise.
You can see the other participant lists if you open that up. So you should see that on your right corner. Yes, so if you go to participants.
Yeah.
You should be able to see those. I think now you can, then you should move that to the side, but you would see that in your screen share as well.
At my screen, it's called View. You have to check side-by-side gallery, and then I see the other, then I see the audience.
What do you mean with side-by-side gallery? Sorry, because yesterday it worked right away, so I never had
for me problem. Now, it's top right. I have a button called View. If I hover over it, I see View, and then I click there, and then I have the option side-by-side gallery. Maybe you have at Meer?
No, I'm not in Zoom now. In Meer, yeah?
Yeah, click there.
Okay. No, I'm there now, yeah. Video panel anzeigen. No.
Maybe.
Try it.
Okay, now. Very good. Sorry about that. Okay, perfect. So I just, I showed you this. These three excerpts of films. So the first one was Hands by Steiner and Van Dyck from 1934, Works Progress Administration film. That was a New Deal agency in the US in the 1930s that employed millions of people to carry out public work projects. So here in that short film, you saw dramatized the greater economic value of hands put to work. And so moving from the inactivity to work in the workshop and factory to the immaterial labor and exchange of money as an introduction of, let's say, the ongoing history of the immaterialization of labor. In the special trains of Kristo Papic from Croatia, from the Yugoslavia in 1974, it's a documentary on guest workers leaving Zagreb to arrive in Germany, in West Germany, in Munich, and they were recruited by Germany for cheap labor force in the bustling economy of West Germany. And before their departure, they were examined by German doctors in Zagreb, as we saw. And the last film from 2014 of Louis Anderson, All That Is Solid, is obviously about the materiality of our digital technology and culture, how e-waste is recycled in Ghana, and he relates that to the supposedly immateriality of the internet and the idea of the iCloud. And we also move from our documentary and instructional film aesthetics to a desktop artistic film that employs other clips found on the internet and shows also this kind of navigating your own hard drive in the image itself. So here, obviously, the hand became a metaphor that runs through the film program, from the working hand to the invisible hand. So from labor migration to the migration of labor. So that represents, I haven't screened this combination, but these films were shown in a couple of my film programs. But you saw here what's key to my curating is very often the combination of historical and contemporary works and films and the mixing of genres. So experimental films, video art, documentary, short fiction, corporate or instructional films, commercial, all these find place very often in my curated short film programs or larger film series. So this becomes by itself then a crossover of different film aesthetics and historical contexts. And so, for instance, these films I showed just presented were partly part of a larger series I curated in 2015 in Brussels together with Jubilee, The Cost of Wealth, screened at Cinematheque at the World Trade Center 1 in the 25th floor in Brussels North and De Buren. This was an extensive series of screenings, talks, and lectures on topics of economy and finance, as well as European integration, the history of European integration. And so what I combined there was a program of feature films, but as well Marshall Plan films, for instance, artistic documentaries and film-based lectures. So for instance, at the Cinematheque in Brussels, I screened Code Menier by Bodil Furu from 2013, or I did have Angela Anderson and Angela Militopoulos delivering a film lecture entitled Unearthing Disaster, that is a visual research project focusing on the resistance to the construction of a large-scale open-pit gold mine and mineral processing plant in Skouries forest in Chalkidiki in the north of Greece. Parts of that project you could see in Angela's contribution to, or Angela's work at last Documenta in Kassel. So the cost of wealth is an example where I also had a lot of historical work in there, as said, Marshall Plan films or early advertisement or documentaries on the European Union, the foundation of the European Union. So in order to be able to do so, that requires quite a bit of archival research. And so that I've done over many years, also physically going to archives and previewing films there, often on the 16mm editing table, because that's material that hasn't been digitalized. And of course, that changed over the past years. So more and more is possible just through the internet in terms of previewing and research as well. But I benefited from this, let's say, extensive projects that involved new research for myself quite a bit over the years of my practice, and could benefit from this knowledge very often, or I keep benefiting from it. So you just accumulate more knowledge, more material, which then later you can use again or recontextualize in new projects. So one important project in that sense was the vision behind technical and social innovation in corporate film from 1950 onwards, a project of the Siemens Arts program, still existed back then. That was in 2007. So here I could really do extensive research also in corporate archives, and then use some of these films in other film series later too. That was a traveling film series. For instance, it screened at the Austrian Film Museum in Vienna, also at the Kino Arsenal here in Berlin and other places. And we published a book to which I contributed a few texts. Or another project that, as mentioned by Arjon before as well, I collaborated with Stefanie Schulte-Strathaus of Kino Arsenal here in Berlin, was in 2006 an extensive film series, Who Says That Concrete Doesn't Burn, Have You Tried? West Berlin film in the 1980s. So with this film series, a later book publication and a traveling film program, we really looked into the film production and the crossover of artistic disciplines in the enclosed city of West Berlin between the late 1970s and 1989. So with the fall of the Berlin Wall, not only the GDR found its end, but also this encapsulated city of West Berlin, which constituted in itself a very particular inner space, which allowed for lots of creativity and alternative ways of life at that time. So for instance, we presented a selection of films under the title Screaming City on a little tour in Canada in 2008. We were at Pleasure Dome in Toronto, available live in Ottawa, or here with this flyer you see the program at La Sala Rossa in Montreal in October 2008. And this is the book we then published in 2008 with B-Books here in Berlin, which with a couple of texts on not only on Super 8 movement, not only on video art coming up at that time in the context of the German Film and Television Academy, but also documentaries and feature films that were made in Berlin at that time, and all examined that very special, let's say, geopolitical situation as well in the walled-in city of West Berlin. And so in the on the back side of the cover, we have had a map of West Berlin at that time, also telling a little bit the stories not only of film production but also of the institutional context. The FFB I had mentioned, very important at that time. Alternative cinemas in squatted houses, for instance, Eiszeitkino is in the list here, or the Medienoperative, which was like many other places across Europe and the United States as well at that time, acquiring video technology in order to do video activism, produce your own media, and to also educate people in doing so, and presenting new videos and video production and video documentaries. So out of Medienoperative, who started to also do film screenings, emerged the Video Fest in Berlin, and this later became Transmediale Festival, for which I worked for 5 years as the film curator, as introduced by Arjon. And so this, what we also touched on it as part of the West Berlin series was the housing crisis at that time, documentaries around that, the housing struggles, squatters movement. So the critique or the resistance against a very brutal, monolithic urban renewal plan. So this topic of the history of the modern city, the housing issue, urban politics, also the fight for a future of a city for all, this has been a recurrent topic in my work and writing as well. And often or very much related to the specificity of Berlin and its free spaces, due also to its particular history. And that's something that now is getting more and more scarce. And then, like so many other places, we are really hit by gentrification and by the financialization of the housing market and so forth. But I think still, Berlin is a place where you find a large and very productive and creative scene of independent art spaces, non-for-profit art spaces that do survive, also thanks to changes in funding policies. And one of these project spaces I keep collaborating with is BİBAK in Wedding. BİBAK is Turkish, and this you can translate it like have a look. And that's a project space focusing on transnational narratives, migration, global mobility, and their aesthetic dimensions. In 2018, I curated a film series for them, Living Landscapes of Living. And that was a series. Here you see their space. It's basically a small storefront where they do screenings, audio events. You can see here a bit their different programs, also social, cultural activity, exchange program with Turkish art, other Turkish institutions or beyond. And lately they do Cinema Transtopia in the Haus der Statistik here in Berlin, which is a huge project of and model project for urban development from below. And so with Landscapes of Living, I curated a series of films that focused on how social, economic, and cultural inequalities are inscribed into urban and rural living spaces. And predominantly, I presented films from Latin America. Here you see a film still, for instance, in the flyer motif, 74 square meters by Paula Castillo and Tiziana Panissa from Chile, 2012. Or from Brazil, I showed Baronessa by Juliana Antunes. So that as one more example of my working around urban issues and issues of urban living conditions. And usually after the screenings, then like also here at BİBAK, it's very important for me to have an exchange with the audience, that there's always a Q&A. Here we had for every film somebody from Berlin with a more particular expertise about the context of the particular films invited to have together with me and the audience a conversation about the film and beyond. So it's very crucial for me personally to always be present at screenings, because you need to communicate what you present. You need to make sure that it's projected in the right way and so forth. So it involves communication and a collective experience, which I think is still very crucial, and I hope we're gonna get back into that soon. And but I'm gonna switch now to a point in time before and back in late 2010 and 2011. I sort of accidentally a bit co-initiated an artists movement in Berlin, which kind of created for a couple of years a strong political voice of artists and independent cultural producers against the hegemonial cultural politics here in Berlin, and called Haben und Brauchen, to have and to need. So to show you also that, to go beyond your curatorial practice, you go beyond with your work, you go beyond the art world with your work and with your your interest in art and in what art and artists and cultural producers have to say. So here it's just one picture. Basso still existed at that time in Berlin, and that was our second event where we had a collective brainstorming about an open letter to the mayor of Berlin and Senator for culture, and claiming a different politics and resisting a particular exhibition he was in, invented in a way. I don't go into details here, but just this as a decisive collective effort and moment for the recent, let's say, debates on urban planning, on cultural politics in Berlin. And so we were not the only ones with Haben und Brauchen, so also more the architects group together. There was a coalition of the free independent art scene in Berlin across the disciplines, theater, literature, music, fine arts coming together there. So it was a momentum where things really had to change, and cultural producers had to raise their voice. And so this open letter really steered up quite a few things, but we wanted to go farther and to also manifest our claims and our concepts. Because what we also understood that, let's say, for the to maintain cultural production in Berlin, art funding is the one, and cheap rents is even the more important aspects on it. So we tried to especially then work also in regard of a vision of a different housing situation and different urban development and maintenance of a social city. And so we created a manifesto that was published and presented in various ways, or participated, for instance, with in demonstrations, here the Global Action Day in May 2012. But soon, especially for a couple of friends or a core group of Haben und Brauchen and myself, we wished for a more sustainable outcome and a deeper analysis of what's going on and what's missing in the city, or what needs to be uncovered in terms of untold stories, undocumented places, blind spots of urban, social, and political history in Berlin and other places. So we started to, we founded the Berlin Journals on the History and Present State of the City. And so this is a series of publications on the myth of social housing, on public vote as a political instrument, on urban commons and so forth. And very important for these publications is they are both available in print and in digital format. and they are very cheap to buy. So they only cost €7, and it's ongoing. So we're in the production of the 9th and the 10th issue. But we started out, in order to do this, to bring together a couple of people, other artist publishers or small publishing houses, in order to understand why are we doing that, how do we organize distribution that it works, and so forth. So that was a kickoff for ourselves, and for the foundation of the Berliner Hefte was a project at NGBK, Druckenheftenladen, Reflections on the Theory and Practice of Independent Publishing. And so just to give you a short idea, NGBK is a very particular art society in Berlin. It exists for more than 50 years in Oranienstraße, and it comes out of a grassroots effort, and it still maintains a very democratic structure. So all the members of the society, of the association, have their vote and participate in the association itself. And the year program of exhibitions, events, and so forth is constituted through a general assembly, to which project groups also from the outside can apply and can follow an open call. So there's no director that defines the program, but it's the association itself, and it's always projects group to work there. So it's a really interesting model, and also quite unique in the context of the German art societies. So here you see the website ngbk.de, and here, yeah, one picture of the General Assembly where it's voted for the next year's program, so to say. And with Druckenheftenladen, we brought together small publishers and artists working with books, also authors and so forth. We had a selection of publications from the history of NGBK, because all the exhibitions projects are related to publications. So it's a very rich history. And we had a workshop and bringing together these artists, graphic designers, of course, and this hadn't happened at that time, so it was very productive, and we still kind of maintain a small network. So out of this, we really learned a lot in order to be able to set up our own little publishing house, Berliner Hefte. Here we had Brad Bloom from Copenhagen at that time. He's one of the founders of Temporary Services in the US, very important platform for independent and self-publishing. At NGBK, I realized, together with a couple of other curators and architects, a huge project last year, Licht, Luft, Scheiße, Perspectives on Ecology and Modernity in the context of the 100 year of Bauhaus. And to also give you another idea of how I apply, or how important in my work is archival research. That was a huge project based on a 2 years or more than 2 years research. And it presented a large variety of concepts and practices that resonate with our current ideas of sustainability. We not only looked at the beginning of the eco movements in the 20th century, but also beyond or farther back, in order to bring together references and to also update our reflections on alternative ways of living in a globalized world. So here you have an installation view. So it was lots of material we presented on the walls, also with sort of a very particular architecture, exhibition architecture. It was a project, a collaboration between NGBK, the Botanical Museum in Berlin, and the Nachbarschaftsakademie at the Prinzessingarten Kreuzberg. So it was also about a transfer of knowledge between the Science Museum and the Political Art Society, between historical material and archival materials and contemporary art production. And here you see you have vitrines with materials, films, for instance. In the back is a film by Michael Klein and Sascha Pirka, 60 Elephants, Episodes of a Theory, with Jonah Friedman. The exhibition at the Botanical Museum rather presented contemporary artworks, also new commissions. And here we have the chance to really intervene, deconstruct the exhibition space, because now it's under renovation. So we could take apart vitrines, rearrange, tear down walls, for instance, very radically here as part of the installation. It's already happened by New Territories She of François Roche, a French architect who really dismantled completely a former lecture space in the exhibition space of the Botanical Museum. And the third location was the one of the best known community gardens in Berlin, in Kreuzberg, the Prinzessin-Garten, here with small workshops. Or for this, I curated a screening program around the topics of ecology and modernity and sustainable living. Here, the film Wild Plants by Nicolas Humbert from 2016. But I go quickly back to my film curating, where I lately shifted. I mean, I did these exhibition projects at NGWK and other places in sort of group contexts, but the first time I really got to curate myself a large-scale film exhibition was in 2020, and that tackled lots of themes and subjects I had explored and worked with as a member of the curatorial team at Transmediale here in Berlin between 2016 and 20. That's the logo of the 2019 edition, which I think was a really intense and very successful of all the successful Transmediale festivals. And so what I was invited by the Centro Internacional de Cultura Contemporánea Tabacalera in San Sebastián to do an exhibition on the history of experimental film, on expanded cinema. And we entitled it Zinex, From Abstraction to Algorithm. Looking back over a history of 100 years, experimental cinema has rigorously challenged cinematic conventions. To reach beyond telling stories, artists and filmmakers examined the material conditions of their medium, such as light, motion, celluloid, and, with the advent of television and video, electronic signals. This relationship with the technical device, whether camera or computer, revolutionized the creative process and opened ever new possibilities for critically reflecting the world we live in. The first edition of the Zinex series presents an international selection of early avant-garde films, computer and video artworks from the 1960s and 70s, contemporary films and installations, and other artistic material. Archival objects not only shed light on historical production tools and dissemination, but also on the mutual exchange between art, science, and industry. Optical phenomena, geometric patterns, moving images generated by sound, concrete poetry, machine rhythms, depictions of what remains unrepresented. Zinex, From Abstraction to Algorithm, offers a wide spectrum of audiovisual experiences that defy accepted ways of seeing and our notions of what exists. Emphasizing the social situatedness of artistic practice, the exhibition also explores the shifting objectification of the human body and the political, economic, and cultural implications of a global society increasingly shaped by digital technology. So you could look at the artist lists already here, just gives you some views of the exhibition, where for me it was very important, a bit similar to what I introduced as my signature for film curating and curating short film programs, that the composition, the relationship between the works across times, genres, historical context is very crucial. So here you could see in one, let's say, panorama, you would have painting, you would have here in the middle, which is a bit overexposed, Stan van der Beek's poem fields, and you have vitrines with archival material. And to also really give an idea about this important relationship, or what I'm tracing there, or what's the trajectory of that exhibition, or what has been the relationship between the artist and the technical device. For instance, I displayed from the ZKM archive an original Sony Portabag from the late 1960s, which was very important for video activism and also for artists working with video. It was affordable on the market and was the first time that we will have a video camera with the video recorder portable, so you could walk around with it and be much more flexible in the filmmaking. That was there. And then as a seminal piece of, or a pioneer in video art, Steina Vasulka with her violin power from made between 1970 and 78 was there on the monitor. But then, as said, like relating, going beyond only artistic works, there was an X-ray film by Professor Robert Janke from 1936, which at that time opened up a totally new vision of the human body. So the camera going way beyond the capacity of the human eye, with these kind of shocking and very uncanny images of the inside of the human body, or the animal body. So in that case, to show that was actually now if I like the word Kaninchen, a little bunny's stomach that was recorded on film. So here another picture of the exhibition, which, as said, like related early computer art, experimental cinema, and digital contemporary work. I just give you some more. Or here, Soledad Sevilla with paintings and etchings produced at the Centro de Cálculo de la Universidad de Madrid, which was important context for artists and architects and others and engineers, and so engineers to come together for the first time to work with computers and explore the new possibilities of the digital media.
Florian?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so I just here, that's UFOs by Lillian Schwartz from 1971, produced at the Bell Labs. And here we see a work of Martin van den Einde, and that is the installation of Free Roam à Rebours Module 1.1 by Stefan Panhans and Andrea Winkler, where the movements and idle runs of avatars are reintroduced into human bodies. So to also here investigate the new relationship between our bodies and the digital media. Okay, that was it.
Thanks a lot,
Thank
Florian. We have about 10 minutes left before we go to the break, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions. I have some questions at least, but maybe also the participants in Zoom. I could start with a very down-to-earth question maybe, and that's coming from our YouTube watchers. Ana Ruiz is asking if you could give the name again of the video artist showing the violinist.
Oh, that's Steiner.
That was the opening film, like the very first images.
Oh, you mean the not? What do you mean, the violin artist?
Well, I'm repeating what Ana Ruiz is saying. I think there was a violinist in the black and white images film at the beginning, or maybe she's referring to something later. But,
no, I think she refers to what I showed now of Zinex. You had Steina Vasulka.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the question
Steina
then.
Oh, but she doesn't see the. Yeah, Steina Vasulka, violin power.
Okay, I hope that answers Ana Ruiz's questions. I see 3 hands raised here in the Zoom audience. I don't know who was first, but let's just start with Alexia.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question. It's also related to something you mentioned yesterday during the panel. You talked about the importance of reaching out to the public and making sure that we build a relationship with the public and we are not always trapped into our curator bubbles. could you maybe share with us a little bit more about your process when you build your projects? How do you think about this dimension of making sure the public feels included and reaching out to the audience?
Yeah, that's always very, very specific, very context and site specific, but often the projects are so particular, and in particular places you have to really do that. For instance, Arjan mentioned I worked with Werkleitz, that's in Halle, south of Berlin. And Werkleitz moved more and more into the countryside as well. So there you're in a very specific setting. So you have to really consider your audience. You have to consider what language is spoken and understood. So that's here in Germany, it's often very tricky because with us working is so easy, everything is in English. We look at all the video art in English and so forth. But if you get to more local audiences, then this doesn't work anymore. So how to deal with that? And and then to also consider setup where you, as I said, that then opens up possibilities of conversation. That you have somebody present, and I think that can talk about the work, not necessarily filmmakers, but also maybe scholars or other people that relate to the work. So it doesn't have to be always the filmmaker in order to explore it further or to reflect on something. So that's also an experience, especially with the historical series. Very often the filmmakers, they are so fed up with their own early work or so, it's not very productive to hear them complaining about how badly made the thing was at that time, while you can now, with a fresh look at it and perspective, you can discuss it in a much more enriching way. So sometimes I find it more productive to have other people reflecting with you, not necessarily talking to the filmmaker. But often this is absolutely great because you have the artist to really enhance and elaborate on the work. And I think that's amazing now that we can even, because for a long time, the mindset was you have to have the person present, which I think is a great quality. But now with Zoom and so on, it's a totally new possibility to do a local screening and in a collective shared space. And you have then somebody from the other side of the world to join in and give more information and have a conversation. So that's a great future, so to say, I think, for being aware and let's say conscious of a local situation, and start basically combine the presentation of artworks and films with a conversation with your audience.
Thank you.
Maybe we now jump to Caroline with the next question.
Hi, Florian. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, in terms of curating, you were talking about the media crossover that you work with, the aesthetics of film, from it, for example, documentary, experimental movies, historical footage. I was thinking about that in terms of putting on an exhibition, made in the exhibition making. How do you choose, or how do you make decisions regarding which types of media are you going to use, for example, to showcase a historical footage? Do you use a video cassette, a VHS, or a digital screening? How are these decisions done to showcase the work properly?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because we are all kind of, everything now is video projection or digital projection. So also like digitally produced work then is projected through a video projector as much as a digitalized original 16mm film or Super 8. So I've never, I mean, I really appreciate and I very much like it to show original formats, and I try to do as often as possible. But you also have to accept, I think, these shifts in technology and in terms of practicalities. And for instance, we had that really at Zinex. I planned for a long time to do a 16mm loop projection of the Liz Rhodes film I showed. And it just became impossible way too expensive for a 4-month exhibition where you have to have a couple of prints made and so forth. So it's really practicalities, but also it's conceptual, how you really by this mediate as well, that we are in the here and now, and we are in the technological setting we have today, and through this we look back into the history and also the history of the media. So I think in Zinex I consider that quite successful to say, okay, we have it, I screen it all on video, but then you have the old technology as an archival object present there, and it's shown through this. It could have been also like a VHS deck playing back one of the films, but that is, I think, it's important to do. It's important to also show younger audiences how the technology looked like, not only talk about it, but have that really present to give an idea, because that's, I think that experience is quite vanished, which is okay. I mean, that's also the progress. And but still, I think it's important because, to also contextualize it properly. So it's not only the historical social context, it's also a history of technological progress and what that does imply in terms of or how that impacts on aesthetics, on artistic practices and so forth. So you need really individual solutions, and often it depends on budget possibilities and let's say, that it's in a good relation and what you can do. But I think it's very important to be aware of it and to make sure that you have to somehow mediate a technical history as well with each of the works.
Thanks, Florian. Let's jump to Marjolein for the next question.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting and insightful.
Thanks, Marjolein.
I was wondering, like, where film is as a medium very white male dominated, but video has much more possibilities and access for women and people of color. And is that something that you notice when looking for material? And additionally, how and when are identities like gender and ethnicity and who you exhibit something that you consider in your curatorial projects? Thank you.
It's also a very interesting question. I try, and I think I did okay, but could have been even better with Zinex to have a good balance between male and female artists in there. When you tackle certain historical contexts, it's very hard. It has been very male dominated, especially like early computer art. But then it's also absolutely possible, to choose for Lillian Schwartz, Soledad Sevilla, Vera Molnar. There were women working also at the very early stages with these advanced technologies and had access to it. So I think that's really a matter of choice and a matter of awareness. But that's something that is always, it's always an issue, and I try to be very balanced there, and also like look at, with Zinex, I try to be as non-canonical as possible. So its ambition to show a 100-year of history, of course, it's impossible, and it's a crazy endeavor. But I think the interesting part of it is to not show those who are always on the first pages of the history books and all the reference materials, but show rather include what's not in there or only on page 31, right? So and that's that can be a very clear and curatorial decision and possibility. It's maybe a little more effort of research, and depending from where you come from, when you start from the beginning to be interested in these, let's say, feminist practices, decolonial practices, or indigenous art production, so forth, you acquire that knowledge and you can easily play with that. If you don't didn't start off with that. I think it's more effort, but it can be done by anybody at any time, and it's very crucial. And it should be you might not achieve in the best way all the time. It really depends on the topics. And when you work historically, like around the issue, I worked a lot with urban information films from the 1950s, 60s. Re-education films in Berlin, in Germany, or Marshall Plan. Of course, it's not, you don't show it for a certain, let's say, characteristics of an artistic point of view. It's more really historical material, and it's about the information and the general aesthetics and the situation of its commissioning. But even there, sometimes you have female directors. But in these historical projects, it's very, very hard. But it really depends on the subject. But I think there must be an awareness and an effort all the time with every single project.
Thanks, Florian. Maybe next question for Noor El Safouri.
Thank you for the talk. I appreciated a number of things about it. I appreciated how you work with the workshop format, organizing, publishing, and how that opens up parts of cinema history, but also parts of how culture is produced and circulated in the present moment. So I really appreciated that. One thing that caught my attention, and it's a bit of an idea that stays with me. It's something that I've been thinking about, so maybe it doesn't come out as articulately as I want it to, but I'll try. So you mentioned the film exhibition as a categorization of the exhibition. And this was interesting to me because in the case that you talked about, the film exhibition is tied to technology. And so as the film enters the exhibition space, its technological history becomes present. It's opened up history of the camera. And this is all partly how throughout my...
Noor, you're breaking up. I don't know if I'm the only one having difficulties understanding you. Maybe you pick up like 30 seconds back.
Maybe you just repeat your last 4 sentences.
Yeah. So I was, so for me, maybe I start from the part about, I don't know if you heard the film exhibition part.
Exactly,
So I was interested in how you categorize that as a type of exhibition. And in the case you presented, you talked about the technological aspects of cinema, photography, the camera, it's opened up to computing. And that's also throughout, this is also partly, it has a historical aspect. This is how cinema entered the exhibition space with its technological innovation. And I was wondering if the film exhibition could be opened up to something other than that. If we are to think of it as perhaps it brings about a certain gaze, if we could expand that gaze from a technological fascination to perhaps something beyond. So perhaps the potential of film entering the gallery space through that format of the film exhibition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I hope to achieve that now with the second Zinex exhibition I'm working on. So we will open that in September, which will relate more to expanded cinema practices and the body and architecture, so much more performative. So I think that was a very particular focus of the first cinema exhibition to tell that history along the shifting relationship to the technical device. And the radical, let's say, shift then even more radical from camera to computer, where creative processes more automated, or the artist loses control deliberately over the generative process of images and sounds. So I think you're right, that doesn't have to be always in there so predominantly. I think with film you are necessarily, technology plays an important part. I mean, there's also technology of how to paint and so forth. And I mean, it applies to all disciplines, but I think to a much more extent with film, and especially now with the digital media. But there are definitely other potentials, and you can do film exhibitions that really explore the potential of film practice and of, let's say, an artistic reflection on our current media environments in different ways, where it's much more about, it's not so much bound to the technology itself, but more the reverberations into the political, social, cultural fields and so forth. So I think that was a very particular choice for Zinex, the first one. In the second, I think we will do different and provide a different, let's say, audiovisual sensorial experience in the space itself as this one, which was quite, in a way encyclopedic. It was very, with the archival stuff and paint. I mean, it was very exhibition, So I want to break that up a bit with the next one and make it more performative on many levels.
Thanks, Florian. I hope that answered your question. Noor, let's go to the last question. We're already a bit running out of time and in a delay. Katarzyna Jankowska, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your really interesting lecture. I was interested to hear about your archival research practice and how you start and where you start doing it, and also what are the challenges of working with archival material. And then going back to what you already said about the presenting, like what are the other ways to present the archival research projects? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there are many challenges. It's again practicalities of exhibition making, lots of archival materials, especially if it's photography, originals or paper. You need very particular climatic conditions in the exhibition space. You could say, okay, why you need to show originals? You can also do the reproduction. So maybe I'm personally a bit fetishist about that it has to be original in the vitrine. So that's my thing, and I think I share it with many. And but yeah, there's the challenges also in terms of the research. So still you have to go to places and do the research there, because in many archives they are not all online in databases, so you have to really do groundwork on finding stuff. And but in the case of Zinex, it was still possible to do it through the internet and in email conversation with archivists that provided me with material. But to have the full experience and to be able to really go through the stuff, you often still have to go to places and do it there. And go through the boxes in the archive. So that's what we did a lot also for the Lichtluftscheiße exhibition. And whether you then show it in a reproduced way or in the original artifacts, you need to find them and you need to make your selection. So that's one basic challenge. I find this really exciting work to do and part of my curatorial practice. And but yeah, it's getting easier because more and more is digitalized, but sometimes you still have to go, and then you have to struggle with attitudes of archives. So there are archives that are really open to present their material, that it's in the public space, and there are others that rather keep it shut and closed. So that's also lots of struggles. And as general with historical work, often it becomes extremely expensive because there are estates who want to profit from the rights and so on. So it's something that easily can become more expensive than even commission a new piece by a contemporary artist friend or so. So there are lots of challenges involved with it. And sometimes extremely easy. So now for a new little curatorial contribution to a show here in Berlin, I just bought quite a few things through eBay myself and then put it in the vitrine, and I don't have to fuss around with an archive who they would have the same thing, but with much more problems. So there's different ways always. You need to find your way, and but it might be complicated, but extremely exciting what you find, and how then how to relate that then to contemporary perspectives and contemporary work. So that's what I'm still excited about, and I think I will keep doing.
Thanks a lot, Florian. We're running 10 minutes late. I suggest that we make up for that by having a break of only 10 minutes instead of 50 minutes. And then the next program will be starting 50 minutes after schedule. And that will be Pauline Drescher, The Makeable Mind. So hope to see you back in 10 minutes from now.
Thank you.